It looks like South Africa will once again be providing a bailout to a state-owned enterprise, this time the Post Office. Finance Minister Enoch Godongwana looks set to amend his February budget to free up more funds for the struggling parastatal. This is above the 2.4 billion rand it's already been allotted. Let's get reaction now from the Communication Workers Union's Secretary General Aubrey Tshabalala, who joins us virtually from here in Johannesburg. Aubrey, good morning. Thank you so much for your time. It was just in February when we heard the budget speech from the Finance Minister, and they'd already said 2.4 billion has been set aside for the Post Office, and it was believed that the bulk of that money would be used to try and get rid of the very heavy debt load that the Post Office was already carrying. And now, just recently, in answer to questions from the Democratic Alliance and further questions about the liquidation of the Post Office, again, the Finance Minister said they'd look at the current fiscus infrastructure and see if they can move money around to try and help out the Post Office. Your union not in agreement with that potential move from the Finance Minister?
Well, thank you. Good morning to you and to our viewers first. The 2.4 billion rands that you're talking about, in fact, it was a delay. Is the money that was obviously given in February, but it was never necessarily been handed down to Post Office. So, as we speak, is the money that has not been moved. We are saying that there's no necessity for the government to continue bailing out Post Office because the business prospects of Post Office are good. One is that the government itself must start to do business with Post Office. I mean, you have institutions like the provincial, the national government that do business with the private sector. That on its own, even if you give it a 60%, will actually bail out Post Office. You have issues like the NASAP, the student loan and all of those things that can be handled by Post Office. So once we invest in terms of the business, that will be sustainable going forward. We are not in support of the consistent bailout of the institutions, that institutions are able to stand for themselves, which those institutions can be able to, give a proper business to the state and give proper services. That's what we are putting across.
Proper services is one thing, but it seems the ongoing issue with the Post Office is not having proper structures running it, or at least figuring out what the so-called business model should be for the Post Office to make it a going concern so that they don't need those bailouts. Where do you think government is getting it wrong with how they're deciding to run the Post Office in the first place?
Firstly, is the political will. Two is the policies in the government, particularly in CASA, that are bottlenecking the business of Post Office. There have been several turnaround strategies that have been put into place since the day of the business administrator till to date, but not even a single turnaround strategy has been implemented or enforced for that matter. So you can see that if you look from the government side, Post Office over a period of time, they've been having acting executive managers, which means that there's instability. And where we had CEOs, they did not stay longer. So that's one of the problems. But two, you'll recall that there was a public protector's recommendation on how the monies of Post Office were squandered. And there were recommendations on how to recruit and follow those people. The government did not do that. And so all of these challenges that Post Office is facing now, including the closing down of more than 300 retail offices of the Post Office, which puts the poor into a situation where they have to go distances seeking for that service. These are all lying squarely at the doorsteps of the department. And that's where we are calling for action. We are calling for people to make sure that the Post Office is revived. So business prospect-wise, Post Office, it's ahead in terms of the network that it has. That's why we are making a call. There's no need also for retrenchments.
Okay, what's next steps? What are you communicating to your members, especially about what the next steps are? What you think the next step should be in trying to figure out what should be done to try and salvage whatever is left of the Post Office?
Basically, currently we are caught up between a hard surface and a rock as a union because we are now going to face a court on the 7th of July, where a decision has to be made now by a judge of whether to go the route of liquidation or the business rescue. We are actually going to join the court and plead for a business rescue. It's a situation where we didn't want to be at this point in time, because if government acted swiftly, we wouldn't have found ourselves in that space. But having been that said, if you're going the business rescue route, the first point that we have to say is exactly that. How do you rescue South African Post services? And one of the things that needed to be done is a financial injection to the post office. Unfortunately, it needed to be done. And secondly, it's how do you revive the network of South African Post Office so that it enables it to have generate revenue, but also compete with the private sector in the space. And when you want to revive that, it's very important, fundamentally, to have a human capital in those areas. So the talks of retrenchment is actually going contrary to that particular proposal. So it might mean post office will need another bailout next year. We have seen this. We have seen in various SOE where the blanket approach of just saying retrench people, you actually lose the skills that you want, and in the near future you're trying to cover the space, and it finds that the business cannot be rescued. We have seen it with a number of SOEs, for example, the SAA. So we don't want to go that route. We want to be careful on how we approach that. And we think that if there is a political will, if the minister can play his role effectively, we can be able to assist the South African Post Office.
Okay, we're going to leave it there. Aubrey Tshabalala there from the Communications Workers Union. Thank you so much for your time and for that update.